Hello YouTube and welcome to Prime Productions. I'm a new YouTube channel, so bear with me as I figure things out. Today I'm going to take an unscripted look at the Kineticist. Why am I doing that? Well, I have a few upcoming videos and I want to use the Kineticist for several builds, but it didn't feel right doing that because Kineticist is one of the most difficult classes in Pathfinder to wrap your head around. So, I wanted to make a video that really quickly talked about how the Kineticist worked before going into Kineticists. Also, as a quick little aside, I'm going to be using game footage from Dragonball Z Xenoverse 2 in order to illustrate my point. The game has nothing to do with Pathfinder, but I found that Dragon Ball Z actually models how Kineticists work really well, and it provides good visuals for what I'm talking about. Now, if you don't know how Pathfinder works in general, I'm going to put some links in the description. Make sure you understand those, because we're going to be talking about Pathfinder action economy here real quick. Alright, so the base of the Kineticist is pretty easy. They have 8+ Constitution modifier hit points per level, much like a Druid or a Rogue. They start off trained in Nature and 3 other skills. They're trained in Will and expert in Fortitude and Reflex. That's all great. They're trained in light armor and simple weapons, so that's always good. The really interesting thing about the Kineticist is that their key attribute is Constitution. That means that their abilities are based on Constitution, and that includes hitting people, which is what they do. Kineticists use elemental energy and fling them at people. So how does a Kineticist work? Well, they have a kinetic gate. Kinetic gate is not actually really a mechanical thing in-game. It's more of a story plot point that kind of brings all the Kineticist's abilities together. A kinetic gate is your connection to one or several elemental planes. And remember, in Pathfinder, there are 6 elemental planes: air, earth, fire, water, plus also metal and wood. Now, before we get started, I need to discuss a few terms that we're going to be using for the Kineticist. The first and most important is impulse. Impulse is kind of like a Kineticist's version of a cantrip. Just like a wizard can sit there and fire off Ray of Frost all day, a Kineticist can sit there and fire off their impulses all day. Now, the difference between a wizard and a Kineticist is that Kineticists don't get spell slots. They also don't get a lot of impulses. Unlike a wizard who can learn new cantrips whenever they get a scroll, a Kineticist cannot learn new impulses until they get a class feat or class feature that lets them learn a new impulse. Additionally, Kineticists are limited on when and how they can use their impulses. However, unlike wizards, they get really powerful impulses, and their impulses level up and become much more powerful than any wizard or druid cantrip. The downside, of course, is that they're limited, and they're never going to get things like Wish or Miracle. So they're really good as blaster casters, but you're not going to be replacing the wizard with a Kineticist. Second keyword we need to talk about is infusions. Infusions are basically meta magic for impulses. They modify an impulse, change it up, make it wider, longer, faster, whatever. Much like Pathfinder's metamagic, infusions can only be used once per impulse. That is to say, you can't put 2 infusions on the same impulse. Another key term is overflow. We're going to talk about this real quickly here, but effectively to do any impulses, you need to open up your kinetic gate to the elemental planes. This is called channeling elements. We'll talk about it in a sec, but overflow basically is such a powerful ability that it collapses your gate and you will need to start channeling elements all over again, which can cost you action economy. There are kinetic stances. These work just like martial arts stances, except for they modify your kinetic abilities instead of your martial arts abilities. There are composite impulses. These impulses use 2 or more elements in the same impulse. For example, there's an impulse that makes a campfire. It is a fire and wood impulse, and then you can fire flaming logs at people, because that's fun. Alright, so how do you play a Kineticist? Well, to start off, like I said, for any impulse, you need to activate your kinetic gate. And doing this is called channeling elements. Effectively, you turn on your kinetic gate. This causes elemental energy to pour out of you, and it creates an aura around you in a 10-foot emanation. Basically, 10 feet around you, if you're connected to the air gate, there's going to be gusts of wind and clashes of lightning. If you're connected to the earth gate, then chunks of earth are going to fly around you. So on and so forth. Every elemental gate you are connected to is represented in your aura. So if you are connected to the air, earth, and fire gates, you're going to have wind and electricity and fire and molten rock all flying around you all at the same time. The aura doesn't actually do anything on its own. However, you can get certain abilities that will change up how your aura functions. But on its own, it's just flashy. It's basically kind of like a kineticist version of drawing your weapon. It lets everybody know you're ready for business. When you are channeling your elements, you can then fire off impulses. You cannot fire off impulses if your elements are not being channeled. However, there are some impulses that can be sustained, meaning you fire them off and then they last for a while, and you have to spend an action to keep them going every round. To fire off sustained impulses like that, you have to start off channeling elements, but then you can stop channeling elements and still sustain those impulses. For example, there's an impulse that turns you invisible. To start off that impulse, you must be channeling elements, but as soon as that impulse is cast, you can stop channeling elements and you can sustain that impulse and keep that invisibility going for a minute. Remember also what I said about overflow? Overflow impulses collapse your gate and make you need to restart channeling elements all over again. One last thing about channeling elements, it is a one-action activity, and when you do it, you get a free blast, which we'll talk about in a second, or you can enter a stance if you have one. So, it does cost an action, but you get some free action economy out of it. Pretty interesting. All right. So, every kineticist starts off with at least 2 impulses, and they're all the same. They're called Elemental Blast and Base Kinesis. Elemental Blast lets you fire off a blast of whatever element you are connected to. So if you're connected to the air element, you can fire off slashing gusts of wind or blasts of electricity. If you're connected to the wood element, you can fire off a tree trunk that either does bludgeoning damage or positive energy damage, which is now called vitality damage. Something to note about Elemental Blast is that there are actually 4 variants of it. You can fire it off as a one-action activity, as either a melee or ranged attack, or a 2-action activity as a melee or ranged attack. If you use the 2-action activity option, then you add your Constitution modifier to damage, either ranged or melee. Also to note, if you use the melee option, you add your strength to damage no matter if it is the 1 or 2 action option. Base Kinesis is basically like Prestidigitation, but only for the elements you are connected to. So you can move around small bits of earth if you're connected to the elemental plane of earth, or you can generate some metal if you're connected to the elemental plane of metal. Pretty simple. Alright, one last thing to talk about. I mentioned that your kinetic gate can connect to 1 or more elements. Well, here's how this works. At level 1, your gate can connect to 1 or 2 elements. As you level up, you can have your gate deepen its connection to one of the elements, or you can spread it out and connect to more and more elements. Each one has their own benefits. Why would you ever choose to start off with connection to only one element? Well, because of something I haven't mentioned yet called junctions. Junctions are basically free benefits you get if you meet certain conditions, and you gain junctions whenever you deepen your connection to one of your elements. For example, the elemental plane of air, one of its junctions is, whenever you fire off a big enough blast, you get to move for free. Sounds great. You only get a junction at level 1 if you choose one element. If you choose 2 elements, well, then you have access to twice as many options, but you don't get the junction. And remember, you can only choose impulses that your elemental gate connects to. If you're not connected to the elemental plane of fire, you're not going to be throwing fireballs. Alright, that was the best I could do at an unscripted way of talking about the Kineticist. I hope it explained things for you. I'm going to try and put out some interesting videos here in the next week or two that use the Kineticist as a base. I hope you decide to stay around and watch those. As always, subscribing, liking, and commenting on my videos will let YouTube know that you want to see more of this content. Thank you, good day, and happy gaming.